Her triumphs, I took a group of women that didn't believe in themselves, and I just believed in them. Her trials.
I never wanted to go to practice. I was losing a ton of weight.
Her story.
I just put my faith in God and just trusted the system.
Her why.
I want people to see what I did and say, oh, that's so awesome. I'm going to be better than that. That would be how I hope that this journey ends.
This is Her Why, where we tell the stories from BYU women's sports. Here is your host, Lauren McLean.
We are so glad you've joined us for Her Why, where we celebrate the women who make BYU sports great. Today's guest is former Olympian, 3-time national champion, and 10-time All-American Tiffany Hogan. She's currently the BYU assistant track and field coach, specializing in multis and jumps for the men's and women's team. Tiffany, it's an honor. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.
You graduated from BYU in 1998. How does that feel when I say that out loud? And it wasn't that long ago. How does it feel to be back on campus and now as a coach?
You know, it's pretty awesome. Campus looks a little bit different than when I was here back in the 90s, and even when I was hanging around still up until 2004. But yeah, it's fun to be back. I'm excited to start working with the team and start pushing their limits. So.
Former track coach Mark Robison decides to retire. How did you become the woman for the job?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with my previous athletic experience and then more recently my own coaching experience at the collegiate level. So being able to coach at Weber State just the last 8 years and taking athletes from the level that they were at in high school, which was pretty decent, up to some national caliber, some athletes that ran in the Olympic trials. So.
You really did do some incredible things with those athletes, but were you hoping, in the back of your mind, were you hoping to return to BYU again one day?
You know, it's always fun to go to your alma mater. When you have a tremendous, exciting experience like I had while I was here, it's fun to come back to your alma mater. So I'm excited to be back.
And track's been a part of your life probably almost your entire life.
Pretty much.
At this point. Yep. How did you originally get started in track and field?
So I come from a family of 7 kids. I'm number 4. So I had 3 older brothers that picked on me relentlessly, but it taught me to be tough. I then returned the favor to my 3 younger siblings and picked on them. But my older brothers did football. And so when they started getting involved in track, my mom loved it because the whole family went to the same facility, stayed there the entire day. Because with my brothers being different age groups, they were at different fields. Sometimes it was across town. And so she couldn't be at both games all the time if they were simultaneous. And so this was awesome. All of us kids could be at the same place at the same time doing the same thing.
So I'm assuming you guys were pretty competitive by the sound of it.
We were pretty competitive. And I grew up playing with the neighborhood boys just to keep me sharp, right? I love playing tackle football and that kind of stuff growing up. I played basketball. I did softball. So I did a lot of stuff growing up. My dad was in construction, so it taught me to work with my hands. So that was kind of what my background was just being outside and doing things.
You played basketball and softball as well. How did track and field kind of make its way to the top?
I think it helped that I was one of the fastest kids in my school. And so in my ward that I grew up in, one of my best friends, her dad was the club track coach. He coached at the high school, so we worked with my brother already. And so that kind of got us involved into it and just took off from there, like just getting all the blue ribbons and the gold medals. And that was just fun for me. And so
he's like, please.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly the hardest worker at a young age, but I was successful, and that was fun for me.
You had that natural ability as well.
Yes, my parents gifted me with some great genes, I will say that.
So how about the heptathlon specifically? How did you get involved in that?
So an older brother of mine did the decathlon. So he did the 10-eventer. And women, we have 7 events. So that's what the heptathlon is. And he ended up going up to what is now BYU Idaho. It was Rick's back then. And he was, I think he took 6th at the Junior College Nationals. And so he was already into the sport that way. And so he got me involved. I started off with the pentathlon, which is 5 events. And before I'd even done it, the only thing I'd done was the long jump and run. I had never hurdled. I'd never thrown a shot put. I'd never high jumped. And so my first experience, I found out the hurdles were way more fun than just running. I had to go jump over stuff. I then learned that the high jump was not my favorite event. I landed on the bar and it hurt my back and I cried. But it got me excited to keep doing it year after year and bring in more events.
So obviously you were very, very good, ended up being very good in high school, what you did.
Yep.
So you chose BYU ultimately, but were other schools considering you?
Yes, I had a lot of, well, back then we didn't really have email. So it was lots of letters that were sent to me. I think I filled out every single reply to each one, their questionnaires that they sent out. But I went on about 4 visits, tried to squeeze it in before the early signing date. Back then we had 1 week we could sign before we had to wait until the end of our senior year. So I went to a trip to Washington State. I went to one to Louisiana State, Weber State, and then BYU. So I went to some really good schools. LSU had actually won 8 national championships in a row. I think by the time I was done with college, they'd won 12 in a row for the women's side.
Wow.
But it boiled down to Weber State and BYU for me.
Because of close to home.
Well, I don't even know if it was close to home. They were just the ones that I felt the most comfortable at when I went there. I think Weber was actually offering a touch better scholarship. But I ultimately decided on BYU. I did a pros and cons list of, what's better about BYU than Weber and this and that. My mom was helping me create this list, and under BYU, she had me write more eligible bachelors, which I was like, wow, that's gross, right? I still wasn't really into guys, but which is funny because there was nothing wrong with Weber in that regards, but. Which my sister ended up going to Weber. My sister was just younger than I, and she had her own experience there. But so I ended up deciding on BYU, which ultimately was a great decision because my coach became the Olympic coach in 2004.
Wow.
So I had great mentor to be taught under as well as be coached.
What's it like moving from event to event while you're competing? Because it's such a, man, you just throw so much energy into one event and you have 7 that you have to do that with.
Well, so an actual heptathlon, it's a little bit more relaxing than a regular track meet because in a heptathlon, it's very structured. You go from hurdles into the high jump, into the shot put, into the 200. So that's day 1. Then you come back day 2, it's long jump, javelin, and the 800. And we're all moving together. You have a half-hour break. If you're at the really big meets, you have bigger breaks than that, but it's structured. When we go to a regular meet, you're just jumping in events and you're just running around with your head cut off. You're changing shoes as fast as you can. You may have 2 or 3 events at the same time. And so those are the ones where it's crazy. And you really put a little thought into it. It's just making sure you're warmed up and ready to go, and you just keep jumping around. So I actually enjoyed those meets because there was really little thinking. You just go and compete.
You didn't have to overthink because you didn't even have time to think.
Right.
How do you train for each one of those events individually? Because they're very distinct from one another.
Yeah. So there was, we would have a very structured week. We would try to touch on every event at least once a week, and we'd try to hit it twice a week. Running was always involved. So we were always getting our 200, 800 style stuff in there. Hurdles were usually 2 to 3 times a week. And then we would usually show up for practice early for our field events. So we'd come in early and hit high jump. And sometimes we would tag on shot put as long as we had enough time in there before the rest of the team showed up. That's how we had it structured, which will be something very similar to what I'm doing with my current team. So then it was just trying to tie things in together. We also had a throws coach that would work with us on the shot put and the javelin. And so we would try to time those things up with when he could be at practice and work with us. So, yep.
Man, you had to have been one of the best all-around athletes on campus because you're doing everything.
Well, I was doing everything. And actually, when I went to nationals one year and was only in the hurdles, I was bored.
You're like, come on.
I had too much time to sit around. So
that is so funny. Yeah. During your collegiate career, you unfortunately tore your ACL. Mm-hmm. What was that like for you?
So it was unfortunate the year I did it, but I think it was a blessing for me. I wasn't the most dedicated athlete. I would try to cut corners. Coach would have like A through G is how he listed things on the workout. And if he wasn't watching, I would skip C and D because I just didn't want to do them. And he wasn't paying attention because he was off working with another event group. But that really was an eye-opener for me. I had hit the qualifying standard for the Olympic trials the year previous, and so I was excited to be able to go to the 96 Olympics, or at least the trials, and they were in Atlanta that year. They're in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so I was excited. Here I am going into my junior year and went and played a intramural basketball game. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yep. And so
not intramurals.
Going through surgery and not being able to even walk going from being the most fit of my life to not being able to walk and having to relearn that and go through the procedure of that. However, that was a competition of itself because there were 3 or 4 other athletes that had torn their ACL within a week of mine. And so it was a big competition in PT and physical therapy. But that did teach me a lot about myself, how to be more dedicated and get back into it and really put forth the effort that I needed to be a successful athlete and not to take it for granted.
So what was your mindset during that time? Were you thinking, I'm going to be better than ever? Or were you thinking, will I ever be able to compete the way I did before?
Yeah, well, it was a little scary. So I'd go out to track meets because I tore it. I'd actually redshirted the indoor season so I wouldn't compete too much. And I tore it right before outdoor season started. So then I had to redshirt the outdoor season as well. So I'm at track meets in this brace that wouldn't allow me to hardly bend my knee and watching everybody else compete. And it just, there's sorrow, right? Like, what is this decision that I made to go play basketball? It was so silly of me. But to then be going through this process of just trying to bend a knee. Like that was literally my workout, was bending my knee. It wasn't even getting strength. And then eventually coming back to strength. At 3 months, the doctors allowed me to run. And my doctor said, you can go out and run a 440. And I'm like, who talks in yards? Like, we haven't talked in yards and I don't know how long. So here I am dressed in all my BYU regalia, like I'm an athlete, and I go onto the outdoor track and there's ladies out there pushing carts with their babies and people trying to be fit, and you could tell they weren't fit, but they're doing their best, right? They're out there, and here I am trying to run 1 lap. And I was dying. I sit down after 1 lap, stretch, and it was like, that was so hard. And I'm embarrassed for myself. I could barely run 1 lap. And, here I'm thinking, I'm going to go run mileage. But we'll go 1 lap at a time, which 1 lap was literally all I could handle that first day.
Man. Yep. But clearly it worked out for you because upon your return, you were an NCAA heptathlon champ in 97 and 98. Yep. How were you ultimately able to come back even stronger?
I think it was that I was more dedicated to practice. Like I wasn't cutting out C and D like I was before. I was putting it all in there. I was more serious about my strength training. My first 2 years, I really wasn't very serious about it. Partly my freshman year, I'd strain my back, and so it kept me out of the weight room. And every time I'd go in, I'd get sore, and I didn't like being sore. So then I wouldn't go to the weight room. But by my junior year, by the time right before I'd hurt my knee, I was getting more serious about my lifting. So I think that helped with my recovery. And anyway, so I got a lot stronger and more powerful. Wow. And helped me come back.
Incredible. And you mentioned that before you tore your ACL that you qualified for the Olympics. What was that process like?
So they had standards that you had to meet. Back then it was an automatic standard and a provisional standard. And so I'd met the automatic, which back then was much less than it is now. But I had met that as a sophomore. I did it at our conference meet. So I was pretty excited to be able to know that about the age of 12 is when I decided I wanted to go to the Olympics. Was I making any effort? No, but that was my goal. I knew the next step was going to college, so I went to college and found a coach that would get me there, but it was a matter of me being able to do all the steps as well, right? Like he knew how to get me there. It was me doing all the work. And so finally knowing that I had accomplished that level that I needed to get at was pretty exciting for me.
Oh my gosh.
And to have it ripped away, I was like, wow. So...
yeah, so many emotions in such a little time, I'm sure. Yep. You tear your ACL, so you don't get to go to the 96 Olympics. What happened in 2000?
So in 2000, now I'm out of college, trying to work full-time to support myself because now I don't have a scholarship. I was working for my brother's swimming pool contractor, and so I'd be out literally all day long. I was out digging trenches and plumbing and tying rebar and doing all that. And then I'd come to practice, and I kind of beat, but... come to practice that year, I'd actually bruised my heel, so I couldn't long jump off of my leg. So I learned to jump off my other leg, which was very awkward learning. But by the time the Olympic trials rolled around, my foot was feeling better, so I went back to my other leg. And at the trials, I just had a mediocre meet, which sometimes that's how the heptathlon goes, and you can still have a good score. Well, it wasn't quite good enough. I took 4th. So going into the 800, I was sitting in 3rd. But the girl behind me, so you get points on how fast you run. Yeah. And in the 800, it comes down to about 14 seconds a point. So I knew the point spread. I knew I had to stay within so many seconds. I think it was, if I remember right, 4 seconds of her. And if it was a 3-second gap, I was going. If it was any more than 4, I wasn't. I was staying home. Well, I ran the first lap. She was a good 800 runner, and I'm not. And so going into that first lap, I hung too close to her. And I ran my first lap about 4 seconds too fast. And I'm like, oh, this is going to hurt. And as I'm coming down the home stretch, she was pulling away and I just had nothing left in the tank. And I knew at that point that I didn't make the team because I just could not move any faster. Like I was going so slow when I walked across the finish line, I was walking, like just couldn't move anymore, locked up, seized up.
Yeah. It's crazy that I feel like people maybe don't realize that aren't super into track and field that it's very strategic. You have to be very strategic. Yep. With what you're doing. And like you said, you push yourself a little too hard or a little too, not as much. And then it's over.
Getting those points. Yep.
Between the 2000 and 2004 games, you had your first baby.
Yep.
What were you thinking? Were you thinking you were going to compete again after that?
So going in, I was married at this point, got married in 99. So this was in 2000 going to the trials. And when I didn't make it, of course, I'm devastated, right? And we're back in our hotel room, me and my husband. And, the whole process, as an LDS person is you have babies and you raise your family, right? And so I was kind of like, my athletic career is done. It's time to move on. And my we're just talking in that evening. He's like, well, why don't you come back and try for another one? And I'm like, well, but what about our family?
Yeah.
And he's like, we can wait. And I was like, what? Like, this was so awesome. What an awesome guy I've married, right? And so I said, well, I do need a break because I'd been training for so long, putting in at least 20 hours a week training and working full time. And so I was like, I need a break. So I said, this is a perfect time to now have a child.
Right.
And then come back and have enough time to get in shape because plenty of women have done it. I mean, back in the early 80s, there was a group that would actually have women have children. This is a terrible story, but then take them away. But the women had, just from the hormonal change, had gotten so much better. And so,
oh my goodness.
Yes, it's terrible.
I had no idea about that.
So, not something we really want to get into, but
but you at least knew.
Much better world nowadays. And so I knew you could come back from it. But I needed to have a support system that would enable me to do that. So having family that was able to help me with that. At the time, we'd moved back to southern Utah, so I had my parents around and my mother-in-law to help. And so that was good, but it was very difficult to work out by myself. And so then my college coach, Craig Poole, calls me up and he's like, hey, they're looking for some strength coaches. Do you want to come and take that job? And I'm like, yeah. So it brought me back up so I could train with the team and train with him and help get me to the next Olympic trials.
That is so incredible. Yeah. So was there anybody, because obviously your husband was going to support you either way, whatever you decided. Was there anyone that was like, why are you doing this in your athletic prime? Like, why are you, maybe even apart from the church, where they don't understand that culture, or like, what are you doing? Yeah.
No, outside of the culture, it was like, you're getting married so young. Yeah. Right? That was the outside of the culture thing. You know what? I've been pretty blessed. I've never had anybody that told me I couldn't accomplish my goals.
So cool.
So growing up, at the age of 12, being like, I want to go to the Olympics, like English class, where do you see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years, and write a paper about it? And it was, I'm going to win gold medals at the Olympics.
And they're like,
I never had a teacher that was like, oh, yeah, right. You got to work really hard for that. None of that. My track coaches in high school never limited me. Nobody ever said I couldn't. So it was pretty awesome. Pretty awesome to be around that kind of stuff.
I think that's really powerful. How long did it take for you to feel like you were in great shape after having your baby?
Well, the first year coming back. So I had him in August, came back to the team in January, so wasn't really fit by the time I came back in January. So as the team is doing their workouts and I'm trying to jump in, I couldn't really keep up with everything, so I'd have to modify a lot of stuff. Some of my jumps came back pretty good, but that's because I didn't have to be – the lighter you are, the better it is.
Yeah.
And so that was helping me. But my throws weren't quite as good because I didn't have the musculature yet. Right. My speed was coming back, but it wasn't quite there yet. So by the next year, so I had him in, when did I have him? 2001. By 2002, I was pretty back. Yeah.
You won the pentathlon at the 2003 Pan Am Games. When that happened, were you confident you were making the Olympic team? Were you like, yep, this is within my grasp?
Well, that's hard to say. Confident. I thought the chances were better.
Yeah.
Going into the Olympic trials in 2004, the standard was pretty high. They bumped the standard up even higher. And I think right after they lowered it, but it didn't really matter. There were only 4 of us that had hit the standard. And so to be able to send 3 athletes from a country, they all have to meet the standard. Okay. So I knew those chances were pretty good. I just had to beat one person.
Yeah.
And the way the meet was going, it was better than in 2000. And so I knew that the chances were pretty good. So
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk to Tiffany about her time as an Olympian and the incredible trials she had to go through to get there. This is Her Why. Welcome back to Her Why. I'm Lauren McLean. We're continuing our conversation with former Olympian and BYU track star turned coach, Tiffany Hogan. So Tiffany, your brother passed away a few months before the Olympic qualifier. I can't imagine how difficult that was for you. How did that affect you in your training during that time?
Well, so I found out I just had flown back from a meet on a Sunday. That was actually the day he had died, that night. The next morning I get a call from my parents saying that he'd passed away. And here I am devastated, like, oh, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm crying, but I need to get out of the house. So I went to practice, trying to act like nothing's no big deal. And I start jogging and stuff. And my teammate, Marcia Mark Baird, she was also trying for the Olympics. And she could tell something was wrong. She's like, what's going on? And I'm like, David just died. And I just broke down. She's like, what are you doing at practice? I'm like, well, I got to do something, right? Like I got to keep moving. I got to keep putting one foot in front of the other, because just sitting at home, all I'm doing is crying. Like, I just feel miserable. At least I'm out here. So then coach found out. And so we had a very modified practice for me, but I was at least outside doing something. But I did have a reflection at that time of, why on earth? Here I have a 3-year-old. Why am I still doing this? I could be at home more with my child and raising him, because he was in daycare for part of the day, and here I am trying to work and make some money while my husband's trying to finish his education so that he can then be more of the supporter of the finances and that side of things. And but then I was like, you know what? There's a few more months. I want my son to see that if you want to accomplish dreams, that you've got to work for it, and sometimes you have to go through rough patches, and this was definitely a rough patch for me, and it took a little while. Even years after, I'd be like listening to an audiobook, and something in that audiobook would remind me of my brother, and I'd break down. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been years. Why am I still sad about this? But obviously love my brother.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a difficult thing, probably a lifelong part of your journey when you lose somebody so close to you. You mentioned your son kind of gave you the strength to move on. Was there something else that motivated you to keep going?
Being a member of the church and being with that community, I just had a lot of support. And so I also was in the Young Women's, and so it was fun to be able to show these young ladies that you can accomplish things as long as you're willing to work, and sometimes you have to sacrifice some things. A lot of things that I say I sacrificed, I didn't always feel like it was, I'm losing out. Right. But it was, making sure my diet's good and getting to bed on time. To me, that's not really a sacrifice, right? Getting good sleep. Yeah. Now that I'm older, I love my sleep. But not so good about nutrition anymore. But knowing that you can accomplish things, and that you don't have to always live within such a streamlined focus of this is the only thing that's important. Because I still was very active in my church. I was still active physically. I was still trying to stay mentally alert with everything that I was doing. And so I was trying to stay a well-rounded person and not just this is the only thing I do in my life. Right. So incredible. You finally make it to the Olympics. That's been your dream. It's been your dream since you were a little girl. It's something that's so rare, obviously, in this life for any athlete. You make it to Athens. Yep. And I'm sure it would be so hard to even describe that whole experience. But how was that meet specifically different than other track meets you'd been in before? So a lot of the meets I would go to, if they were local meets, there's not really a lot of support. There's probably less than 100 people there watching a meet. You don't get real support until you get to nationals and the international meets. International meets are fantastic because people recognize you when you're off the street. Wow. Yeah, I was on national TV and came back to BYU and walked through campus and not a soul knew who I was. So it's fun going to international stuff where you actually get recognized in a sport that people love over there. In the U.S., it's fun when you go to a national meet because the fans there are very into track and field. But to get to that level and have like 80,000 people in the stands and you just got USA across your chest. And so people are cheering for you because of your country, not because they know you, but because they want to support your country because they're from the same country, right? And to hear USA. And so that was pretty awesome. And to have my own coach there, who was the Olympic coach for the U.S. team in my event, and to have Marcia there. That was my training partner that we'd pushed each other for years and years and years. And we both had gotten there and representing. She was from Trinidad and Tobago, so she was representing her country, but so that was pretty awesome.
What an incredible experience. I just can't even imagine. You ended up finishing 20th in the heptathlon. When you look back at that experience, how do you see it? What stands out to you?
So I try not to ever feel like I had regret about it. I went in having the goal of I wanted to be top 10. There were 40 ladies that competed that started the meet. And my hurdles were an okay race. Not exactly what I'd planned. I'd hit a hurdle in the middle of it because honestly I was thinking about the start about 60 meters into the race, which I honestly don't know why, but I did. So I hit a hurdle, just lost focus. So I lost some time there, but I was like, you know what, it's still a decent time for a heptathlon. Went over to high jump, and that event didn't go as well as I'd hoped. Went into shot put, had a season best. So I was pretty excited about that. And then went into the 200, and as I was getting ready for the set command, I wasn't quite ready. They actually put us into set and started the race, and I wasn't even I was still sitting in my blocks going. And I tried raising my hand, which is the signal to say, hey, let's everybody stand up. Let's restart this thing. No, they let the race go. So I'm sitting in my blocks, throw my hands in the air like, what is going on?
No way.
And the race is going, and we get points by how fast we run. And I'm obviously not going anywhere. So I get up, and all these emotions, like, I don't even know what to do. So I start walking, and then I'm like, and then they got this camera right in my face, and I'm trying not to cry because I'm like so emotional at this point. Like, what? And they got me on the big screen, and I'm like, trying to hold all these tears back because I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
And so I go over to the starter and try talking to him, and he doesn't understand enough English.
Yeah.
And he's just like, you're okay. And I'm like, I'm not okay. So I go back to where my coach is at, and he's about the 100-meter mark, so he's about halfway into the race. So I go back over to him, and he's like, go back over to the starter. And I'm like, he's not. Luckily, there was some other officials that were there, and they're like, hey, we're going to get you into another heat because I was in like the second or third heat. So they got me into the last heat. They weren't running anybody in lane 1, which they don't typically at those meets. So they put me into lane 1, so there was an open lane. And I was just so emotionally drained at that point that I ran about a good 170. Sadly, the race is 200, so I faded. But I have like goals for myself that if I'm slower than that or throw worse than that, then I can get upset. That's the only time I can get upset.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's 25 seconds. Well, I ran 24:99. So I look up and I just laughed it off, right? Like, okay, just let it go. Well, so then we move into the next day. My long jump's going good. And I'm like, you know what? I got so messed over the previous day. I'm just going to have fun now. There's no pressure anymore. So I got the clap. I don't usually get the clap for my competition. Because the first time I ever had it, I actually fouled by 2 feet, which is huge. So I'm like, we're just going to play with it. Well, I ended up getting a heptathlon PR. So my last jump of my career ended up being a PR. So it was pretty awesome. Go over to javelin, and I'm a good javelin thrower. And my first throw, it's sailing out there, and I'm watching it, and then all of a sudden I just stumble. I don't know why. I just stumble, fall over the line, so it was foul. So it gets 0 points. And I'm like, are you kidding me? My next throw, I tried way too hard, and it does not go very far. So you've got to be relaxed. Otherwise, you just can't throw very well. So my last throw, I get the clap again. I'm like, I got to get something behind this. And I'm actually yelling at the javelin, get out there, which I totally mocked myself for it. I'm like, what the heck?
I love it.
And that throw ends up being not great, but it was okay. So it was about a 45-meter throw. My first throw was over 50. Had the first throw counted, if the first throw would have marked, I would have been 10th place. So not having that throw, I ended up being 20th. And my 800 was my 800, and I'm not very good at it. But as I'm running down the home stretch, I'm like, this is my last 800 ever, because I hated the 800.
So, oh my gosh, I mean, that is just so much to take in.
Yep.
With all those events. I just can't even imagine in a regular meet doing all those events, let alone the Olympics and all the emotion that ties into that. So there was no thought, like, I'm going for 2008 Olympics. You were done.
Okay, there was a thought, but not in the heptathlon. So I then have my second child right after in 2005. And, I'm like, you know what? At the time, the U.S. was not very strong in the women's jav. And I go, if I train more than one day a week, because that was about all I was getting, put some weight on, because javelin throwers are heavier than heptathletes, I might have a chance. So my PR at the time was 56 meters. You needed about 60 meters. And so I'm like, if I can just train a little bit more, be more serious about it. So a month after my child's born, I start lifting, and I go, I don't want to work this hard anymore. It's hard with 2 kids, and so I just decided not to keep pursuing it. So got into high school coaching and did that, and then eventually started. Ultimately, I did want to coach college. So when the opportunity arose, when my daughter was old enough, we ended up taking the job at Weber.
So you felt peaceful about that when
did.
all was said and done. You're like, I'm good. I had an incredible
with a lack
career.
of sleep, I was.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's talk about how you were a high school coach in 2 different high schools down in St. George, and then how did you get that job at Weber State?
So actually, BYU had contacted me a couple years before Weber did, but at the time my daughter was only 3, and I wanted to wait till she was in school before I took a full-time job, just so I could raise my kids better and not have them in daycare all the time. And so, not that there's anything against that when moms have to do that, but that was the choice that we could afford at that time. And so I was coaching some girls. I was at Desert Hills High School at the time, and they were being recruited. And one of them came back to me, and she's like, you know what? Weber State is not going to have a hurdles coach. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And they're recruiting you, and you're a hurdler. And they're like, and they actually told you that on your visit. And like within a week, I get a call from their head coach, which was Dan Walker at the time. And he had recruited me in high school. So he's recruiting me for the second time to come and be the coach. And he goes, I won out on the second time, and this was probably a better time. So help get just rewrite the record boards for the hurdles and the events that I coached while I was there. So that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And you've gotten the opportunity to coach your daughter a little bit in track and field, which has got to be a whole different beast.
A little bit, yeah.
Does she like that? Does she want you to coach her, or is she like, give me my space?
It depends on the day. Yeah. It really depends on the day. So there'll be times where somebody will ask her if she wants to do track. She's like, no, I don't. My mom made me. And honestly, 2 years ago, I had her do a track meet, and I go, let's have you do, whenever she comes with me, she wants to hurdle at practice. And I'm like, let's have you hurdle at the meet, and you can pick a couple other events. She's like, long jump and high jump. I'm like, sweet. So we get her into those things, and she's like, this is the only meet I want to do. And I'm like, okay, fine. Let's just see how it goes. Well, she ends up winning the hurdles.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So she got the bug.
And I go, there's a meet next week. You want to go to it? She's like, yeah. So then she did. She got the bug because she was enjoying winning, just like her mama. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting all the colors of ribbons and things. And so she progressed through that year and did well and got her into the pentathlon. So she did the same event as me, and that was fun. And then this last year, she had some feet issues, and so we ended up just having her do junior high stuff. But she's got some phenomenal talent.
Oh, man.
Honestly, all of my kids have. It's just what it was their desire, and their desire wasn't to pursue and be ultra competitive like I was in the sport. And so we've just supported them where they wanted to be. And like my son that's a senior right now, he's into mountain biking. So that's been an interesting one for us. We have to hike mountains to spot him, and we only get to see a few seconds of an hour race.
Wow.
But
cool, though.
But we get a little exercise.
Yeah, there you go. I love that so much. Yep. My last question for you is, your accomplishments have for sure inspired so many women and girls in sports and beyond. Why do you think it's important to celebrate and support women's achievements, specifically in athletics?
Well, growing up in the era I did, not a lot of women were in positions of power, especially in coaching. Like if I had a female coach, they were a volunteer that showed up occasionally, so we didn't see them on a regular basis. So it is fun to be able to see more women coaches out there, being able to show that they are just as knowledgeable and experienced as their counterparts, and that they can accomplish just as much. And women bring a different side of it than the men. I've had some awesome male coaches in my life. I've never had any female coaches that I could say they made a huge, huge impact because they had such a minor role that they were able to play as I grew up. So it is fun for me to be able to see the impact that I've made with the athletes that I've coached. It was sad for me to leave my last school when I announced. There was lots of tears, and that was hard for me to know that there was such a strong bond and relationship with some of my former athletes, and I'll be able to create that with some of the new ones. But it is fun to be able to get the announcements of weddings and babies and and to be able to see that and to show these women. So when I came as a strength coach, the head coach, strength coach at the time was like, we want a female in this position, so that, because I was over a lot of women's sports. I was over women's track. I was over men's track as well, but women's track, women's soccer, women's gymnastics.
Wow.
I think I had another one. Now I've just forgotten. Anyway, so I had over 200 athletes. And he's like, we want these ladies to know that you can accomplish a lot as a woman. Yeah. You can be a mom, you can be an athlete, and you can be more than you're only an athlete until here, and then you're supposed to be pregnant and barefoot in the kitchen, right? Which is never actually been our culture, but it's kind of been the belief outside, right? When people look in.
Right.
And I've taught a lot of athletes that are like, my ultimate goal is to be a mom. And I'm like, that is awesome. Yeah. But the things that you learn in sports have helped me be a better mom. Have taught me a lot of patience. And as a mom, I don't want my kids to experience suffering, but that's how you grow.
Right.
And so it's hard to be able to step back and be like, oh, I got to let you experience this on your own. But that's the things that sport has taught me. And so I got to let my children grow as well through some of their trials, even though I want to take them away. But for other women to be able to see that.
Well, what a blessing for your children, and what a blessing for the women and men on the BYU track team that get to have you as a coach. We're here with former Olympian, 3-time national champion, and 10-time All-American, Tiffany Hogan. Tiffany, thank you so much for taking the time and being here with me today. You can download and listen to all episodes of Her Why on the BYU Radio app or wherever you find podcasts. Her Why is a production of BYU Radio.